Not everything has to be big, bright and colourful to be appreciated for its beauty. Most of you, at first glance, wouldn't say that this moth was particularly attractive. But as with all moths, you need to appreciate the subtleties in their coloration and markings. This beauty here is a Pine Hawk-moth. If you do a lot of looking at the trunks of trees, especially around the bases of trees, eventually, if you look at enough pines, you may be lucky enough to find one of these. In fact, the only one ever found as an adult was a few hundred yards further up section O at Clipson Old Quarter, and that was a female. There used to be a couple of large pine trees on this particular corner, and one day as we walked past, one of these had recently emerged and was about 2 foot up the trunk. It remained there till the next day, and then the day after that it had gone. Presumably it had finally been mated. So that's the only time I've ever found one of these. These aren't the easiest of species to find in the wild. If you see these, or are lucky enough to see these, you've probably attracted it to an NV light. This one, I know exactly where it came from, because in 2021 I was beating a range of trees in Mansfield Cemetery. One of those trees was a pine, and off flopped this little chap, but it was only about 1 inch long, and it was a caterpillar at the time. I took it home, reared it, and here's the result. For some reason it's hatched out fairly early, despite it being kept in the fridge as a pupa over winter and then being kept outside for about a month now. I was quite surprised to see that it had emerged today, but it gives us the opportunity to have a good look at what initially appears to be a dull grey moth. To all intents and purposes, I suppose it is, but size helps make this moth more impressive. Overall, the moth is grey, suffused with various shades of chocolate brown. Even the darker markings, those 3 dashes on each of the forewings that you can see there, are brown and not black. It's still a handsome moth. And then you've got this checkerboard patterning along the trailing edge of the forewing. Although the overall background coloration of this species is grey, when they're freshly emerged like this, even that grey you'll see is peppered with scales of chocolate brown. Despite the lack of any bright colours, this is an absolute stunner, as are all the hawk moths, and we haven't seen the best coloured ones yet. They're for a later date. But Pine Hawk-moth is a beautiful species in Nottinghamshire. It's done very well through the commercial forestry, thanks to the large forestry plantations that we have in Nottinghamshire. Or, I suppose you could say had, this moth has done well. I remember when it was an extreme rarity in the county. In the 1980s, if you plucked one of these little chaps out of your moth trap, you'd be jumping cartwheels. These were that rare It took me a while to get one in the garden. In fact, it was last year when one eventually turned up after nearly 7 years trapping. But these moths are by no means confined to the pine forestry plantations of Nottinghamshire. They range quite widely, the males especially in search of females, and will turn up pretty much anywhere. You'll get them in parks and gardens. And say, the larva that I beat off a pine was in Mansfield Cemetery. First time I've ever recorded a larva in the wild form. It's done really well, as I say, in the last sort of 30-40 years, really. And it should continue to do well. There are plenty of pines, despite some pine removal undergone in parts of the county. Either way, when one of these lands in your trap, it's a beautiful thing. And an unusual thing to the markings is the markings on the thorax. For some reason it's only just struck me now, but there's almost an alien's face and head in those markings. But this is no moth from another world. This can be attracted later in the summer to your moth trap, be it in the north of Nottinghamshire or in the very south. It's one to look out for, and it's an absolute beautiful species.